And let me call to order the Police Accountability Board Special Meeting for Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. This is our public notice to access this meeting remotely. Join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using this URL listed below. If you do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, use the drop-down menu and click on Rename to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by phone, dial 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 846-7854-3298. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of this agenda, press *9 and wait to be recognized. And we also recognize the land acknowledgement.
Okay,
And as we do that, let's go ahead and go to roll call.
okay, good afternoon, everyone. For the record, this meeting was called to order at 6:35 PM. I'll now proceed to roll call. Chair Moore.
Here.
Vice Chair Wilson.
Here.
Board Member Calavita.
Here.
Board Member Leftwich.
Here.
Board Member Blackaby.
Here.
Board Member Cayetano.
Here.
And Board Member Cayetano is participating remotely on a just cause provision, and Board Member Moses.
Here.
And on behalf of staff, we have Director Aguilar, Investigator Wechter, Investigator Horton, myself, Analyst Murillo, and from the BPD, we have Lieutenant Montgomery joining us. And that is everyone, Chair.
Thank you very much. That takes us to agenda item number 2. Approval of the agenda. Are there any questions or concerns? Anything that needs to be moved?
Mr. Chair, meeting board members, we received a message that's relevant to the body. It wasn't agendized for today, so I'm seeking the opportunity to do a quick staff update to just read that message into the record.
Is there any objections to that?
Chair, we do need a motion proper.
So I move we make that would that be the 4th item after public comment? Add a
Yes.
staff update? Yeah. All right, so I move that we add a staff update before new business.
Second. We're allowed to amend the agenda like that?
For an informational item, yes. Okay,
And so I guess, so the motion is to add that and then approve the amended agenda.
do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay. And I'll proceed with the roll call vote. Chair Moore,
Yes.
Vice Chair Wilson, Board Member Calavita, Board Member Leftwich, Board Member Blackaby,
Yes.
Board Member Cayetano,
Yes.
and Board Member Moses.
Yeah.
Motion carries.
Excellent. That takes us to agenda item number 3, public comment.
Okay. I will now proceed to public comment. I will start with those who are physically present first, and before moving on to those attending virtually. We also have a correspondence that we will be reading into the record after virtual public comment. With that said, if we have those physically present who'd like to provide public comment, now is your time.
Thank you very much.
Just one moment while I get the timer on the screen. Let's take it. Pardon the delay, it's like technical difficulty.
I'm sorry, read it?
We just need the timer.
We could manually do the time.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kit Sagamore. I live in Berkeley. Thank you very much for presenting this. I read this through this afternoon. It's an excellent report. I noticed what look like typos, which I will email much of the time with that. And I appreciate the fact that you didn't wait until it was completely polished to get it out there in the public. A couple of things I wanted to comment on. On page number, 24 of the report, which is, I guess, page 30 in the packet. One of the things that's in here is mentioning the at-fault collision side of the equation in terms of assessing, bias. This is something that I had also noticed in the report from the police department. And for instance, you mentioned that only those collisions from which the police were called to the scene or were nearby when the accident happens are filed or included in this analysis. It seems to me that provides an opportunity for the bias of people involved to get sort of baked into the statistical comparison. As many people have been in a little accident from time to time, and the decision on whether or not to take another step to call the police to take the information of the other person and so forth can easily be influenced by factors such as bias against the person. I can imagine, I mean, that might not be the case, but I could imagine a situation in which somebody who was from a sort of a dominant group would decide, not to report it if they felt that they themselves were at fault, but to report it if they felt that the other person was at fault. And a person who was not in the dominant group might feel like, well, there's really no point in reporting anything anytime, so they may be less likely to report even if they feel that the other person was at fault. Things like that could in fact get into the statistics in this way. So I appreciate your pointing that out. The other thing, if I had more time, I'll talk about the things that I just really liked. But another thing that I did want to mention to you is in the area about, I'm not going to find it, in the area about unsafe driving practices, the third prong, and you mentioned that things such as seatbelt violations, distracted driving, and so forth, that there may not be primary collision factors. I just wanted to bring to your attention that the Berkeley Police Department, several times a year, more than several times a year, but not maybe half a dozen times a year, I think, does announces the fact that they are doing special checkpoints type stuff. And these get posted to next door. I pulled up an example of a DUI checkpoint that was done in January 19th. It's kind of interesting. They say where it's going to be held. So those people who live next door, like me, can decide that they'll do their drinking and driving to some other intersection that day. But that's, I'm sure not why they're doing it that way. But they are specifically, and they're getting funding from the California Office of Traffic Safety to do these, which I assume means that the officers engaged in it are paid overtime through that fund. I'm not sure. But so these are often things like distracted driving or DUI or seatbelt wearing. So and I rather suspect that the statistics for that time would show more stops for that reason at those times. And when they have given the location, it seems to me it's often a location that's in a neighborhood where people of color are more likely to live in that neighborhood. I believe they choose their locations for things such as proximity to the freeways, right? But that means they're not conducting these up in the hills, they're conducting these in the flats. So
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt the 4-minute mark.
I just wanted to finish up with that. Thank you very much. That's my last remark. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment for those physically present? Okay, with that said, I'll now proceed to those attending virtually. At this time, if you'd like to provide public comment and are attending virtually, please raise your hand. Chair, at this time, we do not have any additional virtual public comment. May I proceed to read the letter into the record?
Yes, please.
Okay, one moment. Commissioners, this is coming from Mr. George Littman. Mr. Littman writes the following. Commissioners, I have been engaged with the Fair and Impartial Policing Campaign since even before joining the Police Review Commission in January 2015. I'm currently a public member of the PAB's Fair and Impartial Policing Subcommittee. I am speaking on my own behalf tonight. I am pleased to see the balanced yet forthright report presented to you tonight. While recognizing forward steps taken by the BPD, it is an unblinking review of the key tasks the department has to complete to achieve true fairness and impartiality. The key findings and recommendations do really sum up the outstanding issues. I'll focus on one critical point. Racial disparities in vehicle stops by the BPD have decreased slightly since the CP report, but remain high. Remember that the Center for Police Equity report was issued 6 full years ago in 2018. We are essentially where we were when racial disparities first surfaced in Berkeley police stops. Status quo is entirely unacceptable when it comes to this level of racial disparity. It means that African Americans in Berkeley have a 6.5 to 7 times greater chance of being pulled over by police compared to white civilians. Studies of stops solely Berkeley residents show that the disparities are similar to the raw numbers. That means that the argument that one cannot use Berkeley's racial demographics to evaluate racial disparities is untrue. It is discouraging that Chief Lewis' response letter does not even mention this most critical of metrics. When officials cite only the statistics that look favorable to them, one must wonder whether they are the best judges of their own conduct. At this point, it is important to be clear that what advocates for non-racialized policing are saying at this point, it is important to be clear what advocates for non-racialized policing are really saying. Our first objective in these many years of campaigning has simply been to get the police department to acknowledge the fact of racial disparities. This is an objective reality and should not be so hard to do. Saying there are disparities in who gets stopped does not necessarily indicate racism in individual officers. There may be existing or implicit bias. There could also be institutionalized racism in the policies or practices of the organization. There could be racism among community members who call the police unnecessarily on Black and Latinx civilians. Finally, there are certainly racist legacies in the structures of many social institutions. Quite likely, all of these factors are operating at the same time. It's good that the chief wants to partner closely with the PAB. To accomplish that, the department must do its part. It must do an honest examination using tools like the EIS of the reasons why officers stop Black and Latinx civilians at extremely disproportionate rates. It is disingenuous to tell the PAB to parse out which factors contribute how much to racial disparities. The department needs to do its part honestly and examine its own house. Signed, George Littman. And we'll be uploading this to our correspondences with our minutes.
So that takes us to our new agenda item number 4, which is a ODPA report.
Mr. Chair, are you able to get the email up? I'll read the, prior to this meeting, and I'm bringing it to the board's attention just because it's time sensitive and you just approved the letter. Again, this is for informational purposes only, no action to be taken. So prior to the meeting, Chief Lewis just wanted to give an update or a typographical issue that was in the controlled equipment report. So it says, good afternoon. I just learned that there was an error in the 2023 Police Equipment and Community Safety Ordinance Annual Report that I submitted to you in the PAB. This typographical error was discovered as we were preparing to submit the report to council, and also as the team begins work on the Military Equipment Ordinance Report that is due to council this summer. Attached, you will find the corrected version, which the department will be submitted to council either at the May 21st meeting or the regular meeting in June. The typo was the quantity of .50 caliber ammunition the department currently possesses. It was initially listed as 50, but the correct count should have been typed as 500. As further detail in the 2022 Police Equipment and Community Safety Ordinance Annual Report submitted in 2023, the ammunition count was at 20 rounds. After this report was submitted, the department purchased a new supply of the ammunition and reported that increase in the Military Equipment Ordinance Report, increasing the ammunition to 520 rounds. After that report was submitted, 20 rounds were expended between training and regular maintenance of the weapon system. The updated figure of 500 rounds of the 50 caliber ammunition is accurately reflected in the attached document, which will be submitted to the City Council. Please bear in mind that ammunition is purchased in fixed quantities by the box or case as applicable and is consumable resource subject to fluctuations due to the usage during training exercises. Additionally, to be clear, this equipment was not deployed pursuant to the ordinance during this reporting period. Please let me know if you or the PAB have any questions about this correction. Again, this is just for informational purposes. Should the board be interested in taking any action on this, it would need to go back to the regular meeting session, or you can, agendize a special meeting session. For my preliminary analysis, information only, I would say that this wouldn't, impact the analysis about the deployment or use, since it was a correction about the amount of rounds, that were purchased during that period.
Thank you, Director. Let's try. Thank you, Director.
Can I ask a question?
We can't. Can we ask questions right now? It's only information.
It's only information, if you're asking for anything that will require action, then we need to go back.
No, the information I'm seeking is clarification regarding the scope of their report. At the last meeting, midway through the discussion, we decided that, or the police asserted that there was one report, both controlled equipment and military equipment. Forgive me if I'm not using the right word terminology. Then I thought subsequently, we got clarification that it was not in fact a combined report.
That's correct.
Okay,
In this email, she just stated that, they're still working on the military equipment report, and that should be going to council sometime in, the summer.
so doesn't that mean we should agendize for the next meeting a corrected motion? In the last meeting, we understood those as a combined report and we adopted a motion accordingly.
Yeah, we could send, the agenda request, and that could be in the next meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions to clarify? Okay, I'm gonna move on to agenda item number 5, which is new business. And new business A is discussion and action regarding the Fair and Impartial Policing Subcommittee's proposed report titled Police Accountability Board Report, Fair and Impartial Policing Implementation. Dr. Calvira, would you care to take the floor?
Yes. So this is my first time with these microphones. Is it working?
Sometimes.
Is it green?
It's green, but I don't hear it working. I think you have to come closer.
And I think, if Josh can, if board member Jonathan here, he is nodding.
Okay, everybody can hear. All right, well, this is a report from the Fair and Impartial Policing Implementation Subcommittee, comprised of board member Wilson, public member George Lipman, and me. And so much credit is due to board member Wilson and also to Mr. Lipman, as well as Liza Lutzker, who is a transportation commissioner who helped us a great deal on the traffic safety section. So many thanks go to her as well. And lots of credit to the office of the ODPA and staff who were critical in helping us put the data together and overall presentation. So let me just say that this report is the product of more than 18 months of work and countless subcommittee meetings. And so the draft, well, I should say too, that the draft was sent to the department about 4 weeks ago to get their feedback. And we did get their feedback, which is generally positive, and that is on page 257 of your packet. And I apologize, I didn't expect the packet to be so ginormous tonight, but there's only actually a few pages that really we have to refer to. One of them is the BPD response beginning on page 257. It's 2 pages, it's brief, it's generally positive. So the subcommittee has worked really hard to make this draft the best we could. We tried to make it succinct yet thorough, an assessment of the department's fair and impartial policing initiatives, but also importantly, outcomes, because the quarterly updates that we and the council have received from the department have not talked about outcomes, but only policy reforms. So this report really focuses importantly on outcomes as well as policy changes. So I hope that you all have had a chance to read this report. It's not all that long, but let me just go over really quickly some of the key findings. One finding is that the racial disparity between Black and white motorists in Berkeley since the Center for Policing Equity report in 2018 was issued, has gone from 6.5 black to white stops based on demographics to 5.8. So there has been a slight decline. However, the disparity in pedestrian stops has increased substantially and has now reached 8 to 1. And this is true, as Mr. Littman said in his prepared statement there. This is true whether you're looking at Berkeley residents or overall. The number of low-level traffic infractions has gone from almost 25% in 2020, I believe it was, to about 19% in the first 3 quarters of 2023. So while this decrease has been, should be applauded, it's still the case that 19% of all traffic stops are for low-level and equipment violations. And we don't have the racial makeup of those low-level equipment violations. Racial disparities in searches and arrests are also pronounced, with Black people 10 times more likely to be searched than white people based on their share of the population, and also 10 times as likely to be arrested. Other findings include analysis of the quarterly updates from the chief and the degree to which various directives have been completed. Before asking for your feedback, I want to make a couple of general points. First, as Mr. Littman mentioned in his letter, it's beyond our capability to untangle all the reasons for racial disparities. And it should be acknowledged here that racial disparities is not the same thing as racial bias or discrimination. But we do not have the ability, I mean, an entire academic industry is oriented around this issue, and there's no way that we're going to be able to untangle those things. That said, I think our task is to focus on policies and practices that minimize the possibility of bias and have the potential to reduce disparities. For example, the disparities in traffic stops declined over the last few years at the same time that the disparity between Black and white motorists being stopped declined. So there's some hint that a decline in the number of low-level traffic stops has contributed to a decline in racial disparities. Our one focus then going forward should be on continuing to decrease low-level stops, as the council directive had said, and requiring that the department collect data on low-level stops, including by race, because we have no data on the racial makeup of people who are stopped on these low-level offenses, low-level traffic infractions. Another critical recommendation is to focus on the implementation of policies and not just the policies themselves. One example of the importance of this is the distribution of business cards, which sounds like a really minor sort of trivial issue, but it's not, because these business cards have on them information as to how to file a complaint or a commendation. And this is marked as complete in the chief's updates. But we have seen no images from body-worn camera footage of any business cards. To my knowledge, we have seen no images of these business cards being distributed. So it's important to look at the implementation as well as simply the formal policies. And let me just conclude by saying, I think one really promising development is a future revamped early intervention and risk management system. That's in the offing. In the meantime, before a fully developed system is implemented, officer audits should focus on outliers, as was originally the original recommendation of the mayor's working group on fair and impartial policing, and not just the random audits that are currently undertaken. And the future involvement of the PAB in this process is encouraging. So like I said, I hope you've had a chance to review the draft and we're open to feedback. And we hope very much to get this to council very soon. There are, I have to acknowledge, and I'm embarrassed, 3 typos, as far as I can find. So I don't know, I mean, I'm assuming that I can just work with staff on that. Don't know how you'd like to proceed, Chair.
Well, I was gonna open it up for discussion, between the board members and see if there's anyone that would like to make any comments, have any questions or concerns. And then we can go from there to motions. Board member Lethbridge, thank you.
You all have the page numbers of the critical things that were passed around.
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments. First, I think the report is excellent and thank you all so much for your hard work. It's really well done. On page 11 of the report, 17 of our packet, we talked about the third prong, the community caretaking,
Yes,
and in the next paragraph, you said if more specificity is not possible or feasible, this prong should be eliminated. And I guess that causes me a little bit of concern, just because it would seem, and the member of the public made a comment about the stops, about the forgetting the term, about there
The checkpoints?
the checkpoints, yeah, and I wasn't familiar with that, so that may have an impact on what I was gonna say, but it just seems to me that DUI and distracted driving would be primary collision factors, and so even absent data, so maybe you could just expound upon that a little bit, because I would be reluctant to recommend eliminating those factors.
I'm looking for I'm searching for.
It's page
Yeah,
11.
I see the page of the report. I'm looking for the actual,
The second full paragraph.
yeah, no, I'm looking for the, 3-pronged approach of the BBB, which is on page 255 of your packet. Which I'm having a hard time reading.
The board member Calvino, we have displayed also in the projector, we could
If you could
also
enlarge
have
that,
staff read it.
yeah.
Okay, and can remind me, it's,
I guess the point was that these were not primary collision factors, and therefore, you know, it struck us and Ms. Lutzker that, either we should be focusing on primary collision factors or not. And could you scroll it up to number 3? Yeah, I myself would probably prefer not to eliminate it, but it needs to have more specificity, it seems to me. Especially since these were not primary collision factors.
Well, I guess I would be a little more comfortable with maybe the reference to elimination, you know, just asking for more specificity.
You know, part of the issue is that these prongs, and I think it's the case in number 2 as well. These are listed as examples, but with the implication that it doesn't cover all of the territory. And so I think it was our impression that the specificity should be to not simply list a few examples, but to be more specific as to, why these are critical when they're not primary collision factors. I don't know, Board Member Wilson, do you have a better, recollection of that?
No, I'm looking back through our, we've been working on this since July of last year. And so this particular aspect of the report, there was a lot of back and forth months ago, so I'm just looking through it. I know that the data does not support these as primary collision factors, and that is the reason that we are asking for them to be reassessed, but I haven't found anything more specific yet.
But I also think that it has to do with, instead of giving examples, specify more what this should consist of. Because it could be pretty, open-ended if they're just examples. As opposed to the prong number 1, which is very specific, and prong number 2, which is community reports, which is the part that might be most open to profiling by proxy. But, I mean, I, for one, would be more than willing to talk about adding more specificity here and delete the phrase about eliminating altogether if that makes people feel more comfortable. It's the open-endedness, I think, of just providing a few examples as opposed to being more specific.
Right.
Mr. Chair, for the record, we got Board Member Cayetano's hand raised.
Go ahead.
So this might be helpful context for people, but community caretaking is actually a legal term that the police are probably familiar with because they would learn it in school as part of their training. And usually it refers to, the police's ability to help, members of the public who are, in need of emergency aid. So like welfare checks, or if there's like a child on the road and they're performing that community function. So I don't know why they're using it in this way in this report, but like the phrase is a familiar one to me because it's in the doctrine. So it's not used in the way that it's supposed to in the report. So I think it's good to highlight it. It's not used, it shouldn't be used this way. So it is confusing. But I hope that provides some helpful context to everyone. And just like one more thing, actually, the doctrine is also very open-ended, and that's what it's one thing that it's critiqued for. Like it allows for, exceptions to the warrant requirement. In other words, it allows the police to search things when they don't have probable cause of a crime, when they're performing these sort of like caretaking functions that would serve public safety.
Thank you for that. I think these 2 paragraphs about the 3rd prong on page 11 are basically say what needs to be said, and I would be okay with deleting the recommendation that if it can't be more specific, it should be eliminated. Nonetheless, the problem is that it's completely open-ended and just no definition of what community caretaking means. And as Board Member Cayetano just said, community caretaking is not really what distracted driving sort of doesn't fall into that category.
The other thing I did see in my notes is seatbelt violations are listed as an example, and like the data very explicitly does not support that that's an issue. It doesn't like impact public safety or in Berkeley. So I am seeing that in my notes on this as well. But maybe we should move on from this one and just see if there's other comments.
I just had one other comment, and that's on page page 15 of the report and 21 of our packet. And it has to do with the RFP for the EIS.
Yeah,
And Board Member Cayetano can mention this at our last meeting, and you weren't here, Board Member Calavita. There was a discussion about an alternative recommendation from us to urge council to do something besides this RFP that's mentioned here. And so I was just wondering if we might want to have a footnote or a sentence that mentions that, and I don't have my notes with me, so I'm not very good at articulating what it was, and again, maybe someone else or Board Member Cayetano can, but it was just a suggestion that I think would be good to integrate into the report, since it was something we discussed at the last meeting.
was that something that had been discussed at other meetings about us having input on the factors that could be considered to trigger an audit?
Actually, no. Board Member Cayetano, came to the board and said that he had a solution for the early warning system and how we could get there faster in implementation and execution. And correct me if I'm wrong, Board Member Cayetano, I know that you're sick, so I'm gonna go until you say, hold on, okay? Does that work? Okay, so what Board Member Cayetano proposed is that we go with a company named Benchmark, who has already been established with large municipalities doing this kind of work that is data-driven. Board Member Cayetano met with them and thought that this might be, and also the Berkeley Police Department met with them and believes that this is a solution that we can move right into an early warning system. So both sides and whoever Cayetano for us, representing our board, the Berkeley Police Department, all wanted to progress with Benchmark. Instead of building this all completely on our own, we would be able to utilize this system that is already ready to go.
But just a point of clarification, because of sole source issues, we weren't going to be saying
Correct.
that council should enter into a contract with that specific group, but that we recommend that they enter into a contract with a group that can do X, Y, and Z, and then seek other proposals.
So what I would recommend if we're going to incorporate that into the report is that we just footnote the recommendation, because this recommendation is specific to the interim period before the new system is adopted. So, I mean, we certainly could footnote that, like, subsequent to production of this
Yeah.
draft,
That'd be great, thanks.
referencing the board's action.
And that's all I had. Thanks
I can
again.
draft that. I know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it,
Excellent.
Julia, thank you for that clarification. That's an important one, just for procedure's sake. But would it be possible, Leah, just on your point, to note that council has not made a budget allocation for early intervention systems, even though they mandated it? Like, I think during that time period, it's still worth noting that there's no specific budget allocation for that. There was only, you mentioned the RFP in 2023, but that was for a plan to implement an early intervention system, but not the actual, itemized budget. And I think flagging that for them might be helpful, because that does arise during this time that you're studying here.
Okay.
Please.
I wanted to change subjects if that's okay. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to address a concern that I have at a more of a 10,000-foot view around this report, and just say a couple of things into the record and how I think we might be able to mitigate it. But I do want to just, before I start, to make a couple of things clear. First, given the parameters that were laid out by the city council, I think that the subcommittee did an excellent job on this report. I think it's well thought out and thorough. I agree with the findings of this report. I'm grateful for the effort that they put into it. I think both the findings and the recommendations are correct. And I also want to make clear that I do think it's vital and important for this board and BPD to be reducing the racial disparity that's outlined in this report, and that we should not accept living in a society where Black people are stopped at significantly higher rates than white people, and that all things being equal, there should not be racial disparity in policing. But we of course know that all things aren't equal. So here's my main fear. This is a major consequential report. I believe the last time this data was presented in this way was the 2018 CPE report. And I have heard the statistics from that report quoted regularly, including during the Police Accountability Board's 50th anniversary celebration. And since that report was released, the conversation of police bias has increased drastically. Since that report, Charlotte, Minneapolis, Black Lives Matter movement have happened. Without context, this report, I think, is a sensational finding that will be reported on. And my main fear is that despite the conversations of folks that are deeply embedded in this room, racial disparity will all too easily be transmuted into racial bias. And the BPD will be viewed as simply racist, simply corrupt, and indistinguishable from the national conversation. There is, of course, context here. Systemic inequity in our country and our community has meant that minorities, especially the Black community, experience profoundly higher levels of factors that contribute to police interactions compared to their white counterparts. For instance, and I have some of the examples here, the last point in time count from Everyone Home in 2022 showed that the Black homeless community is 9 times higher than the white homeless community in Berkeley. The Berkeley Needs Assessment from the Mayor's Office shows the proportion of families living in poverty is 8 times higher among Black families than white families in Berkeley. According to the California Overdose Dashboard, the Black population in Berkeley is dying of overdoses 4 times more than the white population. And speaking specifically of traffic stops, the NIH reported, and this is national, that Black and Hispanic workers were commuting almost half as much, were telecommuting almost half as much as white workers since the pandemic. These are major problems in our community that BPD has very minimal influence over, but it stands to reason that the racial disparities in poverty, homelessness, and drug addiction would have significant contributions to racial disparities in police interactions outlined in this report. But this broader context, I feel, is only minimally referenced on page 10 of the packet, page 4 of the report. In that paragraph, this context is discussed, but the immediate paragraph following it essentially discounts any findings from BPD's annual report that directly test for bias and show more of a lack of that bias. I don't believe that the Berkeley Police Department is a corrupt department rife with unchecked bias, and I don't think that this body thinks that either. But I fear that without more effort to improve the context, that this report can be read that way and that this data can be used that way. In 2018, the Berkeley Side article reporting on the CTE report was titled, "Berkeley Police Stops Show Racial Disparities, but What Does That Mean?" And the subheading was Black and Hispanic people stopped by BPD and searched at much higher rates than white people, researchers told PRC this week, but disparities don't automatically mean bias. I think that this is because, in large part, the CTE report in 2018 put significant effort into contextualizing these numbers, including comparing them to national rates. For example, it included a quote that Berkeley police traffic and pedestrian stops showed the lowest racial disparities in the nation. So to be clear, I'm not saying that the findings in this report are wrong or that the recommendations are wrong. And I'm also not saying that there's not bias within the BPD or that the bias data provided by the BPD is as clear as it should be, as discussed by a member of the public earlier. But I think it behooves us as a substantial body on this issue to be careful and cautious of the narrative that this report tells and how it can be interpreted. So I would like to make a motion to do two things. First, I'd like to make a motion that we add a top sheet to this report that more clearly outlines the difference between racial disparity and police bias, and that some, possibly even the majority of racial disparities shown in this report can be attributed to factors outside of the police department's control. And second, I'd like to make a motion that we do include in this report how these numbers compare to racial disparities in similar cities around the country.
I forget how this works, but
Well,
we make some.
He put a motion out. There should be-
If board members would like to discuss, they could discuss before we go on to the second.
Yeah, I'd rather.
Welcome to discuss.
I'd like to discuss.
Yes.
before we do. Okay, so thank you for that very well thought out statement, and I agree with much of it. Thank you for your acknowledgement of this being a good report. And yes, racial disparities are endemic to every institution in American society. This is subject matter that I have taught for 30 years. I know this. I also know that disparities aren't the same as bias or discrimination. However, racial disparities are endemic to every institution in American society, and so is implicit bias. Implicit bias in study after study after study has been shown to exist in healthcare, in education, in policing. Every institution has within it elements of implicit bias. All of us, if we're honest, know that in our minds, we have implicit bias about all kinds of people. And the point, I think the emphasis that we should have, the folks that should here, is to try to do practices that reduce the possibility that racial disparities are partly about implicit bias, because implicit bias is everywhere. And we can't simply say it doesn't exist. I did quite a brief analysis, I have to admit, of the test for bias that the department did and presented to council with its annual report, and provided only a succinct version of that as an appendix to this report. Those tests that they did were very problematic. I would challenge anyone to say that there is no implicit bias in this department or any department in the country or any institution in America. And so our challenge here is to try to develop policies and practices that reduce the ability of implicit bias to be inscribed in any kind of police practice. And what we have found is, well, I'll stop there. Yeah.
And again,
And I would be opposed to such a cover sheet.
If I could just, if we could just make comments in response to what you've read out. I agree with Kitty, but also I would suggest that it kind of doesn't matter, right? And I think this is one of my fundamental issues with the process and probably with the council itself. And this was one of my responses to what BPD put forward. Are we saying that we don't care how big the disparities are, so long as we're confident that there is no bias? And I don't actually think that's the council's position. I don't think that's the community's position. So irrespective of whether or not bias is at play, we have very significant racial disparities that have not improved since the implementation of FIP, and irrespective of the investment that has been made in FIP. That's problematic from many different perspectives. So I don't think, at least me, I'm not making a judgment call as to whether or not the department is biased. I don't have a view on that, actually. What I do know is the council launched an initiative. There was significant community and staff investment in this initiative and monetary investment. And years later, we see the results. The disparity has not improved. So that's something I believe as a community, we should really care about. And my problem with your first motion is, I don't think that we can necessarily attribute the statistics to broad societal inequity. So I'm not comfortable putting that in the cover sheet. I'm not saying we can't, but I don't know that we can. On the second motion, I think you've identified another problem that I have. We don't have comparator jurisdiction, as far as I can tell, that are broadly accepted to be the comparator jurisdiction. This has come up in our work on the budget. When we're looking at our cost per capita, when we're looking at our clearance rates, all kinds of other performance metrics you might want to look at to compare BPD2, there is not an accepted set of comparator police departments. So I'm not sure how we would choose those that we might use to include in that report. I'm not opposed to it. I just think that that in and of itself is a problem that we have.
Please, Board Member Lovett.
Yes, couple of things. So while I'm not supportive of this particular motion, I must say that when I read this, I did have the same response that on page 4, there's that last sentence, page 4 of the report, page 10. It is not our goal to untangle the complex web of factors responsible for these disparities. And I underlined that when I read it because I felt like we were kind of giving short shrift to the concept that racial disparity is not equal to racial bias. And I also had the same thought about what about comparable jurisdictions? And if we don't have that evidence, perhaps that should be one of our recommendations, that the city or the department investigate and do research about comparable jurisdictions so we can have more context. So I don't know, what I would specifically recommend that we do, but I just did have the same response that I felt like that was a little too buried to just have, one paragraph and the one sentence about it's not our job to untangle, which is true. We can't do that, but I just felt like there should be a way to maybe raise that concept up a little bit, elevate it a bit more.
So, and I'm happy to withdraw my motion and consider alternative approaches here, for example, strengthening this particular paragraph. And I also want to say, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you said, Katie. I think that the reality of unconscious bias throughout our society is absolutely true. I think the reality of unconscious bias in BPD is undoubtedly true. I think that, again, my primary fear is that this is a well-studied body that is able to look at this data with a balanced lens. But once this data is public and out there, we have seen from the 2018 report that it is very easily transmuted directly into evidence for extensive bias within the police department. And when I looked at that 2018 report, there was significant effort, many pages dedicated to this point. And I don't think that we've done that here. And I think that that sets a risk for this data being misinterpreted in a way that none of us wanted to be seen not in the context that it actually applies as racial disparity that needs attention, but rather overarching bias.
I'd like to hear what the rest of the board thinks. I would be opposed to any attempt to compare our jurisdiction to that to disparities in other jurisdictions because I'm not sure what that achieves. Frankly, if our disparities are, look better than that of other places, what do we do? Pat ourselves on the back? I mean, we still want to try to reduce them. And so I think that that's a sort of a fool's errand in a way. But I would be okay with, in fact, I think an original draft had a little bit more about the disparity, not equaling, not being synonymous with bias. That said, like you said, Board Member Moses, the CPE report in 2018 was very careful to make that distinction. And so, you know, you say that that was sensationalized in the press. I don't remember it that way, but if it's true, then, you know, it doesn't matter if we add some more sentences here about that. We can't control what the press makes of it, and frankly, it is kind of, I have to say, I believe it is alarming that in these 6 years, little progress has been made. I mean, if it's sensationalized, so be it.
And that's kind of what I wanted to reinforce about Vice Chair Wilson's point, that in the 2018 report was very careful to walk the line and made sure that it explained bias and disparities and discrimination in full. 6 years later, I don't think that this lesson was taken. So if we are a little more sharp or surgical within our language, I think 6 years later and 6.5 times disparity in pullovers, that's awarded. I think that's okay. So that would be my point. I think this work product is excellent. This is the first time that I've commented publicly to this subcommittee group, but I would like to really say thank you for putting together this product. This is something that I believe this board can be proud of. And I look forward to the discourse it creates. Part of the reasons that we write these reports is that it creates the communication, collaboration. We have the conversations within the different bodies in our city. And it's important. You know, we started talking after the police gave us their report. It's only fair that, you know, we volley one back and we start the dialogue from there. I don't think there's anything that I would say is purposefully antagonistic within the report. I believe it's clear and concise, and I don't, and that's not. Anyone else?
I haven't spoken, so I'll just say a couple things. Again, one, kudos and credit to everyone who's contributed. And it just gives us, again, a body of data and research that we can come back to, you know, time and again. So, in a data-driven way, we have facts and data that we can use to kind of inform what we're doing in the budget and other things. So, so thank you for all that. You know, I agree to some extent with Board Member Moses. It might just be a matter of some of the definitional and just being clear from the outset somehow, just, you know, a little bit more around, here's what we mean by racial disparity. Here's what we mean by racial bias. We shouldn't use these interchangeably in the report. This is, you know, our data, what we can measure is the racial disparity, and that's what we're reporting on, is the racial disparity. So there may be a way of just making that a little more clear. I don't think it hurts the end product at all. I think it just clarifies what it is that we're producing. And to the extent that then there's any misinterpretation, we can always go back and say, we try to be very clear. We're trying to be very clear in the report. This is what we're measuring. This is what we're talking about. I agree with Vice Chair Wilson. Even the disparity is a problem. So it's like, we certainly don't want to dismiss that it's just disparity, it's just disparity, because even if it's just disparity, it's a problem in and of itself. So I would be supportive of something that's just a little definitional from the outset to just help give clarity to those, so that people don't risk using them interchangeably. It's not our intent, but we still are concerned about the disparity, and I'm fully supportive of that point.
So then allow me to, you know, in that regard, withdraw my first motion around adding a top sheet and focus more specifically on expanding the paragraph at the bottom of page 4 of the report to make it more pronounced and more clear that this report does not, of the difference between racial disparity and racial bias. And the methodologies, the limitations of the methodologies to make that determination. I think it could be clarified and in fact even lifted directly from the 2018 report as they again spent several pages, multiple pages talking about that. In regards to my second motion around comparing to the national data, I do think that there is value in setting that broader context, both to highlight the fact that Berkeley continues to care about this issue as evidenced by the effort put forth by this body to put this report together. But without that context, again, I think that it's all too easy to consider the Berkeley Police Department in the same breath as far more troubled police departments. And I don't think that that's the way that we want the public to view our police departments. And again, that's the point that I was making earlier, by the way, Kitty, about the 2018 coverage was actually, it was relatively well balanced, and I believe in large part because that additional context, including the national conversation, was there. But 6 years later, those numbers are still used as evidence of serious problems within the police department. So again, I would like to keep that second motion around including national.
Okay, so on the first motion, in particular,
Well, I'd like to withdraw that first motion.
Sorry,
and go on the-
there's the withdrawing of the motion, but your follow-up motion.
Yes, yes,
It's broken up into two parts, if I understood it correctly.
correct.
Okay, so that first aspect of that new motion is the motion to expand the paragraph on page 4, which is page 10 of the packet, on the reporting. My notes got a little dry here. To expand on the paragraph, page 4 of the report, to explain in terms of the difference between racial bias and the limitations of the methodology, and clarify that point. Okay. Do we have a second on that motion? Would there like to be further?
Yeah, a board member.
Oh, sorry.
Board Member Colasano, please.
I just wanted, I haven't weighed in yet on the report or remember Moses's motion. So I just wanted to say something about the report generally. I'm really impressed with the report, board member Calavita and Wilson, and to George, if you're listening, thank you for carrying on the work of the Fair and Impartial Policing Group. I thought that it was well written. I did have a couple other just points to highlight, but I'm happy to circle back around to them after we focus on board member Moses's feedback. I honestly, I thought that the paragraph that staff highlighted was clear, and it contextualized, it was early enough in the report that it contextualized what we were actually looking at. And I agree that it's really hard to control how people will spin reports. And so I would be against changing the report, or at least with respect to the motion, because I think that paragraph that staff highlighted does the work that you're hoping for. And I don't think it's helpful to, put a disclaimer at the end of every citation of disparity. I think that people who read the report will either know what a disparity is or isn't, and they can use it one way or another. I think that more generally, like when it comes to racial disparities, and this might go to the heart of, fair and impartial policing in general, I do think that there is limitation to focusing on disparities, because if, for example, the police, if Berkeley police are pulling over en masse people for low-level infractions, and we have complete equilibrium between the races and between genders, like I still think that's a problem. I think it's a problem if they're pulling people over and inserting themselves where there's no public safety risk. And so I think that the report does both. I think it focuses on disparities where it needs to focus on disparities in discretionary stops. And I think that the point that I was going to focus on is like when it comes to reducing just like completely the number of stops that are being done, I wanted like sort of stronger focus and emphasis on that in the report, even though like and I think that the net gain we get from that would be changing the way that policing is done in Berkeley, which is in a positive way, in a way that promotes public safety. So that was my general thought. And then so like about the report and about board member Moses's proposal. Thank you. It was a well-spoken proposal. But I when I was reading the report, I focused on that paragraph on page 4. The last thing that I'll say is when the report talks about profiling by proxy, I think that that's actually an item that was not clearly carried out by Berkeley Police Department. And the reference to dispatchers, the dispatchers manual, is only one aspect of profiling by proxy. It's also how officers respond to dispatchers and how officers interpret information that is given to them by dispatchers. And that is covered by the fair and impartial policy. I think it's 401, could be mistaken. And I think that there is some higher specificity that needs to go into that policy in order to direct Berkeley police officers what to do and how to guard against profiling by proxy. So that was another thing that I was focused on when I was reading the report. But thank you all for doing the report and doing the hard work of going through with the back and forth with Berkeley Police Department.
Thank you, Board Member Conklin. Board Member Lovelace.
Yeah, before we pursue the motion and seek a second, I was just wondering if Board Member Calavita would just provide her thoughts about possibly tweaking the language of that paragraph. It's not a deal breaker for me. As I said, I think the report is excellent, and I'm happy to vote in favor of our board publishing it. But again, as I said, that I did have a little bit of the same reaction that Board Member Moses had, although not enough for me to have mentioned it early on. But when he spoke about it, I just wanted to express my concerns, and I guess Board Member Blackaby had something along the same lines, but again, I don't think it was a deal breaker for him either. So I just wondered, Board Member Calavita, if you had any thoughts about that.
I'm not opposed. I mean, I can't speak for the committee, so Board Member Wilson, you can chime in here. I know that you and I had some discussion about this definition of disparity and so forth. I'm not opposed to adding a couple more sentences here about this. I don't think we should go on and on about it.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to a couple more sentences. I don't think, I'm pretty confident it won't do what Board Member Moses would like it to do in terms of, so, you know, I'm not opposed to that. I am strenuously opposed to making comparisons with other jurisdictions as if that makes us okay. I mean, I really think it is sort of, I don't know how to say it. I'm just opposed to saying, well, we're doing better than they are, therefore, we're great.
Right, and I hear that, and I guess for me, I was just curious when I read it, well, what about other jurisdictions? I'm not necessarily saying we need to put that in there, but I hear you, what does that mean? Is it really relevant? I was just curious.
Yeah. So anyway,
I'm not opposed to beefing up the language. In fact, I think you had it beefed up and I suggested it as a bring it down. So, and I think you could also consider, we could move it up. It could be kind of in the beginning. It doesn't need to be on page 4.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna make much of a difference, but I'm fine with that. I have a different view on the comparator jurisdictions, although I do think the conclusions one might draw from that are questionable. You know, there's legitimate questions about that, but I do think it's important just in any organization to benchmark yourself. And if we are really substantially better, that's great. We still have a lot of work to do. And if we're substantially worse, and yet we have made all of this investment and done all this work, then that would be really concerning. I don't feel strongly about it at all. But I do think going forward, we should settle on a set of comparator agencies that we consider for many different aspects of our work, not just this.
that could be. I also have to just say that, you know, it took us so much work to put
I
this
know.
together.
Yeah, we
To do it for other jurisdictions and say, well, this is how.
The council have our metrics to do their data.
But I don't
Because they
think,
have different measuring.
no,
So
anyway, that's
it'd be a lot of work, maybe a long-term
in
kind
the
of
future.
in the future. And I don't know who we compare it to because we're Berkeley. I'm just gonna say that. But that being said, I know there is a motion, we're searching for a second.
And the motion was,
It's on the motion to expand on the context for the paragraph on page 4, explain the difference between racial bias and disparities, and the limitations of the methodologies.
And I'd also add to move it higher in the report to differentiate it from the subsequent.
Like a friendly amendment.
Yeah, friendly amendment, 100%.
Okay, that's been introduced.
Yes,
Okay, I'll second.
okay. Now,
yeah,
okay.
Any more discussion?
I just wanted to say, I'm happy to add those sentences. It might be more difficult to find the perfect place to put it.
We can work on it.
Yeah,
Well, let's go to that.
Okay.
But we might not have. Let's go.
Okay, so I'll now go to the roll call vote. Chair Moore,
No.
Vice Chair Wilson,
Yes.
okay, Board Member Calavita,
yes, to show good faith.
Board Member Leftwich,
Yes.
Board Member Blackaby,
Yes, with no commentary.
Board Member Cayetano.
I'm sorry, the motion has two parts to it. I think procedurally it has to have just one part, right?
It
That's
only
right.
has one now, I thought.
No, I think it
Correct,
has,
we're on the first motion.
no, it has, the two parts were to change the add sentences and then move it up.
I
Are there-
don't think that's two parts of a motion.
No.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, because I'm in favor of moving it up, but I'm not in favor of changing it.
So you should vote no.
Okay, no.
Okay, and Board Member Moses.
Yes.
Okay, the carry motions with 5 ayes, 2 noes, and no abstains.
Excellent. Thank you all.
I would like to just, add, make one more little change. It's on page 12 of the report. And this is sort of a typo, something that I meant to change at some point, and it didn't get changed. It's the first line of the first full paragraph. The PAB analysis of vehicle stops reveals that no progress has been made. I would like to change that to little progress.
It says little.
Oh, it does?
In our
Yeah.
draft.
Oh, good.
Good stuff.
All right.
Okay, and we also made a decision to add a footnote to the EIS recommendation. So maybe I don't know if we want to make a specific motion to that.
I would make a motion to do that. Can we get a second?
I second that.
Okay, on the motion to add the EIS footnote to the report, moved by Chair Moore, seconded by Board Member Leftwich. I'll now proceed to the roll call vote. Sorry, it's allergy season. Chair Moore,
Yes.
Vice Chair Wilson,
Yeah.
Board Member Calavita,
Yes,
Board Member Leftwich,
Yes.
Board Member Blackaby,
Yes.
Board Member Cayetano,
Yes.
and Board Member Moses.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries 7 ayes to 0 noes. Okay,
This will
Did
take
it-
us to agenda item number 4B.
Sorry, just.
can we vote to move this forward with these additions?
Can I ask about what people thought about my profiling by proxy comment? Did no one have the same reaction?
Oh,
Is that-
I'm sorry. I want to respond to your comments, Darren. I don't think you're wrong at all. I guess I felt that at some point we were not beating up on the department. It will, like, there's issues with virtually every aspect of this and either the implementation of many aspects of the FIP recommendations. And so I just felt like we limited our sort of analysis and assessment of some of these areas necessarily because the overall nature of this is fairly, I'm not gonna say critical, but there's a lot to do with what we've done as it stands. So I don't think you're wrong. I just don't think we delved extensively into that particular recommendation. So we could beef that one up, certainly, but that's why it is the way it is. And there's a number of these where we didn't say that much, and there's probably more to say.
Just for a point of clarification, when we're talking about saying that much and what we're actually trying to thicken up or beef up here, what language are we misusing? And is it a legal term of phrase, or is this something that affects the work product? Is that your issue, Member Cayetano?
No, the legal term was in reference to the community caretaking, which was discussed earlier. I'm talking about on page 18 of the report. Page 24 of the agenda, profiling by proxy section, which has come up in our discussions in the past. And there's a general open-ended invitation to the department to clarify what the manual consists of, but I thought that there was an opportunity for the board to weigh in on the substantive policy that is 401. But if that's not within the scope of the report, then I understand. I just know that profiling by proxy, that section of the Berkeley PD's manual, is one that I've been wanting to look at. And the section here is really short. It's what, 4 sentences, 5 sentences. So I just saw it as an opportunity to expand, but only if people agreed.
The recommendation says future BPD updates should specify what instruction dispatchers are given, blah, blah, blah. So I do think we have an opportunity when we get the next BPD update to focus on that issue and maybe take action then or do something more specific related to the policy. So we do call out a specific recommendation on that and to get more detail on what the dispatchers, that's on page 22. So I guess I'm suggesting even if we don't modify the report, I think this provides the opportunity to do something on the topic going forward.
Sure. I think that profiling by proxy covers more than just dispatchers. It also covers officers, and that's not very clear in the policy, and it wasn't clear in their understanding of the implementation either. But if that's not something that we want to get into right now, and we can talk about it later, that's fine with me.
Doctors, what do you think?
Well, I see what you're saying, and as I read this section now, it's more asking questions than it is making statements in that paragraph. And it does focus more on dispatchers. I don't know that now's the time to delve into that more deeply. Maybe we can do a policy review of 401 and focus in on that more. Does that make sense?
Sure. I don't.
Doing a policy review of 401 could be a good segue to from the report. 401 being the fair and impartial policing policy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. First thing I'm gonna ask for where I'm at here, are we good to move on to our next agenda item? Or is there something
No.
standing on the floor?
Chair, I was hoping that we could, that I or someone could make a motion tonight with these tweaks, with these changes that we've agreed to, that we can vote on this document so that it can move forward.
I believe there's just one more motion before.
Yeah, I did just want to see if there, again,
I'm with you.
the motion, again, looking at the 2018 report, including quotes, such as, our president said in front of the national conference, Berkeley PD has fewer disparities than any of the 242 police departments that he's seen through the National Justice Database Project. Sounds like a broader national context that, I would like to include in this report. So my motion is to include some of that broader national context in this report.
Is there a second? Not seeing or hearing any.
And motion fails.
So now would be the time.
So I'll make a motion that the board accept the report as to be amended pursuant to the resolutions passed this evening. And that the accept and authorize submission to the city council of this report.
I second that.
Okay. Now proceed to roll call vote. Chair Moore,
Yes.
Vice Chair Wilson.
Yeah.
Board Member Calavita,
Yes.
Board Member Leftwich,
Yes.
Board Member Blackaby,
Yes.
Board Member Cayetano,
Yes.
Board Member Moses,
With respect to the quality of work, effort, and my backing of the findings, I say no.
the motion carries 6 yes, 1 no.
Excellent. That takes us, thank you all for your hard work. I do appreciate it. That is a milestone. I'm glad we got through it. That being said, that takes us to 4B, discussion and action regarding the appointment of board members to represent the PAB labor negotiation process related to PAB's permanent regulations for investigating complaints. And Board Member Leftwich, before I give you the floor, I just also wanted to say about this that we got some really good insight at our last meeting from City Attorney Chang, Deputy City Attorney. These negotiations are extremely important. This is how the department is trying to, the department and the city attorney's office is trying to create the systemic ways that we're going to interact with the city at large and with all the other stakeholders. So this isn't just us in the regulations here. I want to be very clear. This is a larger conversation with much more at stake. That being said, Board Member Leftwich, you have the floor.
Okay, so City Attorney Brown and DCA Chang had recommended that Board Member Calavita and I represent the PAB in labor negotiations because we served on the regulations subcommittee. And the labor negotiators retained by the city agreed with that recommendation as indicated during our closed session of March 27th. So Board Member Calavita and I just wanted to be sure that the board was comfortable with this approach, and if so, request that we formally be appointed to represent the board in the negotiations. My understanding is that were we to be involved, we certainly would not be making any unilateral decisions. We would discuss the proposals and bring back any recommendations that we would have for final approval by the board. And also that the city council would be the ultimate decider of any policy. So regardless of what we recommended in this board, recommended the city council, it's up to the city council.
I would make a motion right now that your Board Member Calavita and Board Member Leftwich represent the Police Accountability Board within negotiations.
I'll second.
And then I think that's assuming you accept nominate, I mean, assuming that's fair, you be in favor of that.
Yes.
We have the other-
My machine doesn't talk too much of this. It's all right, I can talk loud.
Want to take?
Um,
Probably the first one.
Yes, I accept.
Good to know.
I'm kind of wondering what it involves. Does anybody have a sense?
So,
Yeah, purposefully no, but it's going to be intense.
oh, sure.
I'm gonna be honest.
Okay.
My Charlie McFly. But we do have a second here. We're just gonna run this vote now. That Board Member Calvina's on the minutes.
Okay, so. On the motion to appoint Board Member Calavita and Board Member Leftwich to represent the PAB in the labor negotiations, I'll now proceed with roll call vote. Chair Moore,
Yes.
Vice Chair Wilson.
Yeah.
Board Member Calavita,
Yes.
Board Member Leftwich,
Yes.
Board Member Blackaby,
Yes.
Board Member Cayetano,
Yes.
and Board Member Moses.
Yes.
The motion carries, 7 votes yes and 0 no's.
Great. Which takes me to metrics and budget. Board Member Blackaby, you have the
So
floor.
one, I will start and Board Member Wilson, please jump in, and we'll tag team it. This is just a quick update, work in progress on where we are with the budget. This is not a final work product. We wanted to kind of put a framework out in terms of where we're going and kind of get the sense of the board as we're moving towards putting together the draft report. Just to remind people on timeline, so where we are in the budget process is that each agency is negotiating with the city manager for budget. They're going back and forth. The next sort of couple of milestones are, there's a budget and finance policy committee meeting on May 9th. There will be additional meetings in May. The city council will receive the draft city budget on May 14th. There'll be additional public meetings on June 4th, and then they'll vote to approve the budget on June 25th. So May and June are sort of the busy windows. The next PAB meeting we have is in 2 weeks, which is May the 8th. So our intention is to take the input feedback out of this meeting, since the meeting, make sure we're kind of on the right track with what the board, I believe, is the right direction, and hopefully have something that we can bring back, debate, edit, and approve at the May 8th meeting, so we can, again, be right in the pocket with the rest of the budget process, May 9th through the balance of May and into June. That's what we're trying to do. What we've shared here is kind of the framework of our current thinking. Some of these recommendations are, probably will not be implementable for this current budget, but are the things we thought, observations we made that would improve the process going forward for future budget reviews like this. And so just to kind of tick through where we are, I want to thank the chief and thank Ann Cardwell and the budget team. Again, they've been responsive. We've been going back and forth. We've had several calls. We've set forth some questions in your packet. We've included the questions we asked and the information they replied with. So I think they're providing us with what they have. I think some of our observations are, in terms of the process, we think there might be a better way down the road to get us to the goal. And so, for example, if you look at kind of what we laid out in the recommendations, number one is that the right now, it's sort of the budget is kind of built from where we are now and authorized staffing levels now, and then kind of growing from there, as opposed to starting from first principles and saying, here are the key service levels that we want to guarantee the city. Here are the metrics that we want to track around response times, around the time the officers spend on each call, maybe the minimum number of officers we want out on the beat. What are the clearance rates? What are, like, set the metrics and the goals that we want to track, and then think about the staffing model and how to allocate resources to reach those goals. And right now, so the process, it's a little murky in terms of what are we trying to do with the resources we have? Like, what's good? What are we shooting for? What are we trying to do? And so I think our observations, we should just have clarity and agreement on what those metrics are, what we're trying to do as a department, and what the budget is going to try and accomplish. And then we can track it from year to year and know, are we doing things? Part of it gets back to some of the work we were just talking about with FIP, which is understanding the metrics, and are we moving the needle? And I think we can do a little more of that with respect to the budget. So this whole first section is like some ideas, and we need to flesh this out more, but one whole prong of the recommendation is we need to start from first principles and make sure the budget is a reflection of the plan to reach those goals. So that was number one. Two is, it's then hard to sort of get the detailed breakdown of how spending is allocated towards those particular programs or towards those particular outcomes. We know, we'd asked a number of times, like, okay, so based on the new crime stats, or what we've seen, what's, property crime is up, violent crime is down, right? Are we changing anything? Are we allocating and making decisions based on that? Or do we want to adjust to go after a new hotspot? And it's hard to see in the budget process how those priorities are set and if we're going after those things. So just one more level of visibility down or transparency down into more of the programmatic spending and how resources are being deployed would be helpful. And so those are the two big buckets are understand the key metrics, set some key metrics, set the key goals and let the budget flow out of that. And two is having more transparency to more detailed levels so we can know where the budget is being targeted. And then the last thing is setting those two things aside. Are there some very specific things, tactical things for the coming year? This is where we thought we could add the catch-all, for example, like let's make sure we budget for the early intervention system, not just the RFP for the consultant, but for the actual system itself. We could comment here, for example, about does dispatch need more resourcing? I think our response times have not been great, but they've been getting better. Are we concerned about traffic enforcement and traffic safety? Is there a question there that because we don't have BERCDOT and that's not been authorized and they've been pulling back from traffic enforcement? Again, this might run counter to FIP, but again, are there things we want to suggest in terms of very specifics that we want them to incorporate into the budget? The use of SCU, other things about, more modernized policing. So this has been the kind of a catch-all bucket for very specific tactics. So anyway, that's the structure. And Leah, go ahead and jump in here.
Yeah, and then I think we'd, moving on, we'd have, just a section with observations, and that's the next part. And so you can see some of the initial observations relate to some of the things that Brett went over already. Like at each meeting, we get an update on recruitment efforts and staffing. And really, there hasn't been a step back to say, like, why is this number the number that we are shooting for? Why is it that, the 154 filled officer positions we have is not sufficient and we need 180? And that ties back to this whole question of metrics and what are they? What are our goals? And that's really for council to set, I think, not the department. But I think that lack of clarity impacts all of us, the department and us, in trying to do our work. So I think that's fairly self-explanatory. With respect to the SCU, that of course was supposed to reduce the need for BPD staffing in certain areas, particularly I think patrol. Yet it's very unclear what the impact is of the SCU on the budget now or what it's expected to be in the future. We should have a section that talks about the MOUs with other agencies, because that is what's driving a lot of overtime costs. And there is a lack of transparency about full reimbursement for BPD costs when it's contracted with these other jurisdictions. And part of the challenge is the reimbursement does not go to BPD directly in their budget. It goes into the city general fund. So you can't really tell if it's fully cost neutral. And even if it is, does it impact the department in terms of overtime demands for the staff that are not out on the MOU assignment? And then you can see this is more for you guys, the annotations regarding the BPD request that we've seen so far. And the alignment with the department identified goals. Another point I would make for us to consider is the city itself does not have a current strategic plan. I believe the last strategic plan was 2018, 2019. And the department doesn't have a strategic plan. So again, when we're asking questions like, what are the goals that we're trying to achieve? There isn't that overarching frame. So instead, we have the goals that the department identified in their annual report, which you can see in 3A. And then some attempt to say, how does what is being requested align with those goals in the annual report? And there's not such great alignment, and that's neither good nor bad. I don't know, maybe they don't need any money for these goals, but that's where we are right now. So I think you can kind of see where we're going, but admittedly, it's a bit messy.
Murky, yes.
So this is what we've done so far. We're working on it.
All right, thank you.
Maybe,
I appreciate the presentation.
any questions or again, counsel or guidance or, yeah.
Thank you, guys. This is great, super informative and helpful. I just had a question about the MOUs, because I'm not clear how that relates to, the budget or what those MOUs are.
Okay, there are MOUs with other agencies. So we've talked about, we've talked about some relationship with the campus, but you might have one with, another city or even an agreement with a private company. I think there was one in place with Apple on 4th Street for a long time. And so that's supposed to, result in full cost recovery. Whatever that entity is charged is supposed to result in full cost recovery. It's difficult to assess that because, as I said, the revenue does not go back into the BPD budget. So you can't like match it, cost to revenue. The other is, if you have this limited pool of officers, and some of them are being deployed to do the Apple Store, even if their time is fully reimbursed, do you then need your existing remaining group of officers to work overtime because you have fewer of them to do the I'm picking on the Apple Store, but that's the issue with the MOUs.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
That's why that staffing, and there is this whole Citygate report that she's been anxious to get. She's been waiting, so it's like they're waiting for this report. Because I think there's going to be they're hoping to get some staffing recommendations in terms of like, are they, and this will help answer the overtime question. Do we have enough staff to do what we're setting out to do? Where are we missing staff? Is overtime contributing to there being a shortfall, all that kind of stuff. So they're hopeful that the Citygate report will help answer those questions. We don't think we'll have it in time for the budget. So we're gonna have to move forward without it, but that'll be a piece that gives us something.
Thank you for that, and I just want to give the floor to the director because we have been involved with the MOU discussion. I didn't know if you wanted to give them an update on our MOU requests, where those are at.
No, but I can, but I was just gonna ask. Just a quick question for board member Blackenby for the dates that you said.
Oh, yeah.
What was your understanding?
So
of when-
this might have been outdated. You indicated a new date at our last meeting. I think your date's probably, when we asked them a few weeks ago, they thought May 9th was the budget and finance meeting, but you might have said May.
No, that's still correct. So they were initially gonna put it on the full council agenda on 14th, but today, we heard that the senior leadership team meeting that they're going to council on May 21st.
Okay, good. So that gives, okay, so that's actually, so the budget committee is the 9th, but it will go to the full council on May 21st.
Right, and that those subcommittee meetings were just too stacked that they wanted to give a little bit more.
Which is great. Okay, cool.
I'm sorry, point of information. Previously, it had been said May 8th was the BPD budget at the budget committee.
I'm sorry, we're gonna have to answer your questions at the end if you're so close. If you can just hold on, I can't give you the floor, I'm sorry.
You can.
That being said, you're right, I can, but that being said, I'd like us to, and thank you very
Yeah,
much.
no action required. This is just an
Right, it's a
update.
discussion.
Can I just have one
So-
additional comment to the budget piece real
Yes,
quick?
this will be the last one and then I move.
I just wanted to say, I think the first principles point is spot on, and I really appreciate that direction. I would encourage you to consider either higher level around, the goals for crime statistics. Because then you can also roll in the questions around budget for things like traffic cams or investments that are not staffing and try to tie those to these high level goals.
So if we've seen an increase in XYZ, then it may not just be a staffing
Exactly.
response.
Or conversely, why are we putting in the license plate readers and what is the impact that that's having on the goals that we're saying they're supposed to achieve?
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you all. And that brings us to agenda item number 5, which is public comment.
Okay. We'll start with those physically present before moving on to those virtually attending. Is there any public comment from those physically present?
No.
Thank you very much. I'll try to keep this brief. The the discussion that I heard this evening, sparked in part by the things that board member Moses brought up about the context in the wider society. I just want to highlight one of the things on the second page of the response from Chief Lewis. She has a paragraph there that says, "We suggest the FIP subcommittee develop a theory of change linking each recommendation to specific factors contributing to disparities, e.g. socioeconomic inequities, institutional practices, individual bias. This will allow us to better assess if reforms are addressing any aspect of the disparity." That is a humongous task that I believe is way, way beyond the capacity of the subcommittee or this board. It would take another whole, letter of work. But it would be great if the city as a whole was undertaking to do this. For instance, as one of the statistics that board member Moses mentioned, the large increase or the overrepresentation of people of color, particularly of Black people, in the homeless population. And so the statistics showing that the larger number of stops among pedestrians could in fact relate to the fact that there are more homeless people now than there were. And therefore the high proportion of pedestrians they are stopping are homeless, right? And then a high proportion of those people are Black. But that's not something that you can put together here. But it is a problem for Berkeley as a whole. One of the things I've noticed in looking at, and sort of to segue to that, that's sort of a separate issue in a way. In looking at the conversations on Nextdoor, I can see that there are a number of people, I don't know how large a number of people in Berkeley, who have serious implicit bias problems, serious explicit bias problems. And I'm sure that there is pressure on the police from people who would like their own biases to be reflected in how the police behave, basically. So the larger context of the inequities in our society are as you've noticed, as you all know, extremely important to what we see happening in the police department and the disparities in the police department. And this, I don't quite understand why the police chief would be asking the subcommittee to undertake this, but it would be good if the report that you put out can lead to a larger discussion of city council and more work being done. There's some things being done, but more work needs to be done around this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? Okay, with that said, I'll now move on to our virtual attendees. At this time, if you are participating remotely and you'd like to provide public comment, now is your chance. Please use the raise hand icon or *9 if you're calling in. Again, this is your opportunity to provide public comment if you're attending virtually. Chair, at this time, I do not see any hands raised.
So at this time, it takes us to agenda item number 6. I'm going to ask for a motion in a second.
So moved. I move we adjourn.
Second.
And that's all. Thank you all very much. Our business is concluded.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.